This is going, and let's bring in our panel. We're joined here in the studio by the Labor MP for Jagga Jagga in Melbourne, Keith Thwaites. Very good evening to you. And Keith Wallachan, the Liberal member for Menzies. Appreciate you both joining us tonight. And you hold, Keith, one of the very few Liberal seats, federal seats in metropolitan Melbourne. I think it's 3 that the Liberals currently hold. Do you feel like you're going to be one of only 2 Melbourne Liberal MPs?
It's not looking good, David. I think an important principle in any election and any democracy is that every vote gets counted within a reasonable statistical range. I remember on election night I went to bed 45 votes ahead, and then the postals broke 60-40 and it changed things. The turnout is very low here, and I'm not sure how that plays out in the importance of...
Well, let me put that to you because, yes, we were hearing that turnout was low, and both Labor and Liberal camps were telling me that that typically and historically favours the Liberal Party. So what's happened here?
I think we need to find out, because a lot of things that were typical are not typical anymore. When you look at previous decades back, the inner city and metropolitan areas voted right of centre. Higher education people voted right of centre. That's flipped, not just in our democracy but others, and I think we need to consider how that plays out for the turnout.
So what's gone wrong for the Liberal Party? Is the Liberal brand in Victoria toxic?
It's not good. I wouldn't use the word toxic.
And what word would you use?
I think, I don't know. I'm lost for words, to be honest. We're a city of 5 million people, and if we lose Aston tonight, to have 2 federal Liberal seats in a city of 5 million people, that will in the next decade be Australia's largest. That's not just bad for my party, that's bad for our democracy. And then on a state level, to have in a quarter of a century, 1 term of a Liberal government, anyone who's watching this that takes joy in that, I'd say, what does that mean for us as a democracy? And I think we need help as a party, and we need more people in our party.
That's a reasonable point, and Kate, we will come to you in just a moment. But from what you're seeing, this disastrous result for the Liberals, you're lost for words, as you say. Can we cut to the chase and ask you about Peter Dutton? How much responsibility does he bear for what we're witnessing?
Well, we all are responsible. I'm responsible. I'm a metropolitan member, so...
But he's your leader.
Yeah, but I've got to know him and know that he is a good leader. He really is. He's a good leader and he's a good person.
He might be a good leader in your view, but is he not resonating with voters?
Well, we need to consider that, but it takes a while to hear the message that's come from an election. We're still counting votes. I'm not conceding Aston tonight, and I think it may be a few days before we really know.
Well, Kate Thwaites, how is Labor feeling about these results? Is this what you were expecting?
I don't think it is. There's a reason you keep saying extraordinary tonight. This is extraordinary. There is a swing towards Labor. There are still votes to be counted. I totally acknowledge that. But this is a swing towards Labor in an area we didn't expect it. And there are 2 scenarios. Either we fall just short or we win and we overturn more than 100 years of history and have a Liberal seat swing to us at a by-election. So either way, this is a terrible result for Peter Dutton.
There's no doubt that this is a troubling result for Peter Dutton, but I am interested in the Labor strategy here because clearly Labor knew you were in the hunt. You've spent, I think, on some internet data I saw in terms of advertising. You've invested in this seat.
Had 18 front benches there.
Anthony Albanese was there just this morning. He's been there throughout the campaign. Did Labor get a sense that there wasn't sort of a sense of anger at your government for the cost of living crisis that we're seeing?
Look, we've got a great candidate in Mary Doyle. I actually want to acknowledge that up front because Mary, this is her 2nd time running in this seat, and you know it takes a lot to put yourself out there for 2 campaigns in just over a year. So we've got a great candidate who has campaigned hard, and of course, you know, the Prime Minister has been there and has backed her in and has backed Labor in. And I think more broadly what we're saying is that in Aston, in electorates around the country, people are respecting that they've got a government who wants to govern. And I hear this in my electorate all the time. What people come to me and say is, oh, it just seems like the grown-ups are back in charge, and I'm really pleased to hear that. And you contrast that with what's happening in the federal parliament with Peter Dutton and the Liberals, where they do just say no. They've dealt themselves out of climate legislation most recently. They voted against $15 billion to rebuild our manufacturing industry. Here in Victoria, they've spent 2 weeks tearing themselves apart about whether one of their members should have appeared alongside
Interesting point you make. I do think that's an interesting point, the no-alition that we keep hearing from Anthony Albanese. Keith, do you think that the Liberal Party looks like it's been too negative? Do you think that's worth looking at again?
It may look that way, but in my experience, most of the time we're constructively supporting legislation that comes before the Parliament.
But that's not... No, these are key pieces, two pieces of climate legislation. Yeah. The Reconstruction Fund, the Housing Fund, it goes on. You've dealt yourselves out of the Senate negotiations.
National anti-corruption legislation, we constructively supported that.
But just talking about these key pieces of legislation just in the last week that you've obstructed or not participated in doing any deals to make the legislation better, do you think that's been the wrong strategy?
No, I don't think so, because I think that they're bad legislation. And that this... whatever has happened tonight, and we don't know what's happened tonight, we have a good idea. I don't think that suddenly means our analysis of a particular bill is flawed. And we looked at those carefully and had careful party room deliberations on those, and they're flawed legislation, and this doesn't change that. Whether that messaging was made clear or not, well, that's something we'll have to look at.
Labor did run a negative campaign against Peter Dutton. Has that worked?
Well, again, I think we rightly brought Peter Dutton into this campaign. I will note that the Liberals had him on none of their material today. I know he wasn't in their local ads. If you look, he wasn't in New South Wales when they lost there either. Peter Dutton has a problem.
He was in your ads, wasn't he?
He was in our ads, and that is a problem for him.
So do you view Peter Dutton as an asset for the Labor campaign?
Well, I think in this case, again, you see where the material has been, as you say. He was in our material. We did make it clear that he is the leader of the Liberals. If you vote for the Liberal candidate, you're voting for someone who's going into Peter Dutton's team and who will be led by him and the strategy he's been taking of saying no to everything.
Should Labor win this seat of Aston, break the historic rule of what happens at by-elections, further push the Liberals out of metropolitan Melbourne, will you feel, as a Labor MP, emboldened to be even more courageous on the policy front, whether it's tackling some budget repair, doing some of the things on tax that are politically tricky? Will you feel emboldened?
David, I think what's happening with this swing, what's happening more broadly, what I've talked to you about, is that there is that sense that grown-ups are in charge.
Kate,
and
sorry,
that means
sorry, hold that thought. I will come back to you. Anthony Green's got some breaking news. Anthony.
Cue, thank you. I thought I was going to get my music, but I'm not. Straight into it.
You deserve your music.
I'm used to my fanfare. Look, the numbers still continue to be that way. 41, 42 for Labor, 35 for the Liberals, 11.7. And it's still projecting to be 40, 40, 10, with two-thirds of preferences to Labor. And on that basis, let's just look at the change in vote here. As you can see, that has been consistent now for over an hour. And if we look at the two-party preferred swing here, 6.2%, 53.3. Now, I just went down the polling places. There's only 3 polling places the Liberals have got a majority in. They're not going to turn this swing around. So we're prepared to say, from looking at the numbers, that the Labor Party will gain Aston, that Mary Doyle will be the first Labor member for Aston since 1990. Now, if the Liberal Party do then win this from here, this will be the biggest turnaround I've ever seen in terms of an election. That's why to call this that result is just such a big political earthquake which will come out of this result that I've been very cautious. But there is nothing which points to anything other than Labor winning this. The only way Labor doesn't win this is if the Liberal Party completely reverse the result on the early vote, and I just cannot see that happening.
So just to be clear, Anthony, you are calling it. You've seen enough now to say that Labor's actually made history, won the seat of Aston.
On these numbers, Labor has made history and will win the Aston by-election.
Anthony Green's called it. There you go. Sorry, Kate, I had to interrupt you to get that call from Anthony Green, but what do you make of that?
Well, amazing. As we've been saying, that is extraordinary. I'm not sure if, from a Labor point of view, we're as entirely there as Anthony is, with all due respect to Anthony, because obviously he knows his stuff, but it is extraordinary and it cannot be anything but a terrible, terrible night for Peter Dutton.
Keith, it is a terrible night for Peter Dutton, isn't it? You've heard Anthony Green, who we respect and is a national treasure, just call the Aston by-election for Labor.
That is, and with all due respect to Anthony, I still want to see at least how those postal votes break, as well as the pre-polls. that there was a lot of them, and I think they deserve to be counted at least in substantial
Are you
number.
hoping for a miracle, though, to be honest?
Of course I am. Can I tell you why? Leave my party and Peter out of it. Rashina is an outstanding candidate, and we hear on so many times after elections that we need more people like Rashina. So to have put her up, and she did everything right. Everything a candidate should do, she did, and then some.
Yeah, interesting you say that, and she's certainly very accomplished. But is parachuting somebody from outside of the electorate part of the issue here? You know, we kept hearing throughout the campaign she lives in Brunswick, the trendy suburb of Brunswick. It's a far cry from anyone who's been to this seat of Aston knows. It's a very different kind of place. Was that part of the issue?
Well, that was certainly part of Labor's negative campaign, because Mary Doyle doesn't live in the seat either.
She lives in the eastern suburbs.
Well, you know, we're splitting
Brunswick.
hairs here. We're splitting hairs, and I like
to be honest, it's a bit more than splitting hairs, isn't it?
It's not Brunswick.
Oh, the negative campaign, I think, clearly must have had an effect. It must have had an effect, but that's not on Rashina. You know, that's not her fault. She's an outstanding candidate.
She can live whatever she likes, but the question is it tactically a mistake to parachute someone in?
Look, it might be. It might be. And I think that was something that Labor saw in the federal election in Sydney.
Fowler.
Yeah.
Christina Keneally. What about having I know by-elections are tricky and there may not have been at the time, but the rank and file branch member pre-selection, is that a factor here, not having something like that?
I'm a huge defender of party democracy. The problem here was just the tight time frame. We didn't have time to do it. Of course, always should have a member plebiscite.
But coming back to Kate's point about Peter Dutton, the fact that he look, I don't know whether he appeared on any Liberal corflute at all, but you know, clearly there wasn't much signage from the Liberal side of your leader. Plenty from the Labor side, scaring the pants off voters with the images of Peter Dutton. What does that tell you?
Well, can I correct the record? Peter wasn't in hiding. He visited five times and was on Rashina's socials, on every platform. There was no hiding of Peter. And this morning, you know, he was there. And yesterday morning, he was at a football club getting the #1 ticket holder.
He was.
Yeah.
Maybe that's your issue then. Is it that voters decided that Peter Dutton was not the kind of Liberal they wanted to vote for?
Well, if they did, it's not fair, and I know politics isn't fair. It's not meant to be fair. But if that perception is there, then that's a perception that doesn't match the reality of the person that I know.
And what do you have to do to change, to deal with that perception? Because, you go to fairness, well, it's not delivering you electoral results.
That is true, and I'll give Labor this credit, that they are better at running negative campaigns than we are. Much better at it, and it's very effective. They did a fantastic negative campaign in the last election, and they did a fantastic negative ads on this one too. Perhaps we need to learn how to do that, but I think we should always try and rise above it.
Just quickly, I note you haven't mentioned the state-level Liberal Party infighting over the transgender rally and so on. In your view, was that a factor here at all?
We weren't picking that up in any of the listening posts, door knocking on the booths in pre-poll yesterday or today. It just wasn't coming up.
I want to go, just to hold that thought, I want to go to our reporter Leanne Wong. She's now over at the Labor Party function tonight in Aston. Leanne, Anthony Green just moments ago called this result for Aston. How's that gone down in the room there?
Oh, look, David, I don't think anyone in Baronia could have missed Anthony Green calling Aston for Mary Doyle. The cheers erupted here when that seat was called. It almost lifted the roof straight up. There's been chanting for Mary, there's been cheers, there's been foot stomping over and over. You can kind of see right behind me. It's really live and probably and it's really light and day to Liberal Party HQ. Where they let them
right now very well. It all says a lot. I don't think this is the celebration. I'm not sure if you can even hear me, but I'm not sure if they were expecting to be celebrating quite like this at the Labor function tonight.
No.
I'm not sure if you can tell, but they're incredibly happy here. And I think a word that's getting thrown thrown around a lot right now is just the word historic, that this is a historic win. Labor supporters were telling me going into this they were not optimistic at all. They really thought the odds were stacked against them, and history was stacked against them. No government has won a seat off the opposition in a by-election in more than 100 years. Even the local state MP here, Jackson Taylor, saying that he really wasn't optimistic at all. They really put in the work. They said that they door-knocked in one afternoon about 4% of the Aston electorate. But again, they really just thought that this election was going to go towards the Liberal Party. And in fact, when I was chatting to Liberal insiders just before coming here, they were still incredibly confident. They really thought that this was their seat to lose. They were expecting a swing of at least 3% back to the Liberal Party. Some were saying that they thought that the seat would be called before 8 o'clock in favour of the Liberal Party. So really, it seems that this result really has taken a lot of people by surprise.
Leanne, it is extraordinary. I know you can barely hear us, but thank you. We'll speak to you a little later. We'll cross back to you. Hopefully, if you're still standing, it looks like you're about to be mobbed or something's going to happen. I want to bring in our panellists again. Keith, as we are digesting this historic news, Anthony Green has called the Aston by-election for the Labor Party. What does the Liberal Party need to do to heed the messages of this election? I mean, it seems to me like you have a deeper brand issue. What do you think you need to do going forward?
We need to do everything.
You can't just be going negative in campaigns.
No.
Fundamentally,
I
in terms
agree.
of policy
Yes.
and connection with voters, what do you need to do?
We need to do everything. And can I give a plea to my own party and my own party members? The first thing we need to do is to come together. I think when we fight and it spills over into the media, to think that Victorians don't notice that is just ridiculous. And when we're fighting with ourselves, that they know that we're not caring about them and we're not listening to them. So
Is that your message to the state Liberals?
To all of us. And I'm a member of both. We're a federated party. So as Victorian Liberals, we've had a lot of tough nights, from the federal election, the state election and tonight. And many will question, is there a future? They will seriously question that. And what does that mean for our democracy? These are important questions.
What else do you say to your party on policy? Have you become hostage to the LNP branch in Queensland in your federal party room?
I don't think so, no. I formed, it was broken on insiders that we formed this Metropolitan Members Group, and it's about talking about how, as a party, we can better listen and react to Metropolitan seats. I've invited Metropolitan members, and if the results are as they seem tonight, that will be one less, I'd actually now like to invite the whole party room to that. Because if you're in a country seat, if you're in a regional seat, and you aspire for the Liberal Party to be in government, it doesn't happen.
You're not getting back into government without these metropolitan
Absolutely.
seats.
So this is now a task, not just on those from metropolitan seats, but all of us.
Can I just get in? Sorry, there's a question I really want to ask you. One of the big dilemmas for your political party will be forming a view on the voice to Parliament to be enshrined in the Constitution. If you look at the public polling and certainly the view in Victoria, and you're a Victorian MP, this is a by-election in Victoria, there is sympathy to this proposal. How do you go forward? Does the party need to support at least a free vote to allow people to campaign for a yes vote? Should you reconsider the negativity that the party has approached the voice debate with?
I come from a party that is driven by values and principles over power. And yes, tonight is a tough night, but we should always be guided by our values and principles. And I'm on the Voice Joint Standing Committee, so I will have a front row seat in what really will be a constitutional convention, because we didn't have one and we should have had one. There are serious concerns about the constitutional risk to the wording as designed, and I think we wouldn't be standing for principles if we don't seriously question that risk. Now, in the end, Victorians and Australians will all get the same vote as me. We all get one vote, and that's an important principle too. So I don't read party political results into how Australians will vote in a referendum where we all get the same.
Notwithstanding those concerns, and I understand you're likely to be elected as the deputy chair of this committee.
Well, we'll see what happens.
We'll see what happens. Do you accept that the signals the Liberals are sending on the Voice is costing them in a state like Victoria?
No, there was been no signals that the approach, which has been a correct one, is to ask for detail.
It's been a very negative approach. I don't think anyone could contest that. It's been negative. You haven't heard a lot of positive sentiments about the Voice from Liberal Party figures?
Because the detail really matters. This is our constitution, and I spoke about our democracy. And
But do you think that negativity is affecting your vote? That there is a perception that you may contest, but a perception that your political party is not modernising, is not moving with the country?
There's always a risk of a perception, but I think our first duty is to stand to our principles. And the most important structure for our democracy is our constitution. It's so vital, and it's a beautiful document that's not flowery and doesn't, it won't be in a musical or anything like that, but it has stood this democracy, one of the world's oldest democracies, well. So to be conservative about that is to defer to our democracy and the Australian people.
Let's go back to Anthony Green with another update on the very latest counts. Anthony.
Polling place in. So this is everything. Every vote that was cast today is now in. And the numbers are still looking rough the same. Labor between 41 and 42. Liberals on 36. The Greens 11.6. Again, still projecting to be 40, 40 and 10 there, which would deliver victory to Labor. The two-party preferred. Now, this is a projected 53.4. Labor's currently on 56. And we're projecting that the postals and the absence will bring it down to 53. So the Liberal Party needs to do way better than they did at the last general election to turn that around. Because as I said, Labor's currently on 56. There's only 3 polling places that the Liberal Party has won. And I think we counted there's only 3 polling places where the swing is under 5%. So, I mean, this is consistent all across the electorate. We haven't got any pre-polls, but it will be remarkable victory, and we'll just bring this up here. And Mary Doyle will be represents the first gain by our government from an opposition at a by-election since 1920. Everyone should remember 3 years ago, I remember the Eden Monaro by-election, which was the first big test of Anthony Albanese at the time when Scott Morrison was still popular at the early days of the COVID outbreak. Anthony Albanese got slightly lucky in that by-election. They had a good ballot paper draw on a very large ballot paper, and his leadership would have been under huge pressure if he'd lost. He won. He went on to win the election 2 years later. This is a terrible result. It's a terrible result. This is a seat the Liberal Party shouldn't be losing. In this climate, they've lost it. This is a terrible result.
No other way of putting it, that's for sure. Thank you. Just before we lose, let our panel go, just one quick question to each of you. Keith Wallahan, another by-election, Anthony mentions that Eden Monaro won some years before that, 2018, there was a by-election in Longman, a swing against the Liberals. There was a move pretty soon after against your leader at the time, Malcolm Turnbull. With this result, terrible, disastrous, whatever word you want to use here, there's no doubting this is all sorts of bad news for the Liberal Party. Should you stick with Peter Dutton?
All those decisions are for the party room to decide.
I'm asking you.
Yeah. The person I know, yes. Yes, I really do.
No doubt in your mind?
There's always, I mean, everyone has doubt, but the person that I know, that I've got to know, I didn't know him before I came to Parliament.
But do you think he can win you a general election?
I think he can. It's not. I know I'll get ridiculed on Twitter for that, but I really do. I think he's a good leader, and I saw good and bad leaders in the most trying of circumstances, and he has all of the qualities of a good leader.
And Kate Thaiss, we've obviously focused a fair bit on the impact this has on the Liberal Party, but for Labor this is a night of celebration, I'm sure, and you've acknowledged it earlier, this was not what you expected to happen. Mary Doyle will be joining your ranks in Canberra. Your footprint expands in metropolitan Melbourne. What does this mean for the Labor Party?
I think it means that people here in Melbourne and across Australia look at our government and think that we are doing the things that they think are important. And I think what they also see is that Peter Dutton hasn't learnt from the 2022 election result. You know, you were talking about the Voice earlier. I was in Parliament when Peter Dutton said he wished now that he hadn't walked out on the apology. And yet he doesn't seem to have learnt from that. He is taking the same approach on the Voice. It is an approach where he says no, where he is negative, and this is the approach he's bringing across the Parliament. So, you know, I think what people here in Melbourne, in Aston, are seeing is that the Liberals haven't learnt. They're not listening to what people are telling them about their approach and their policies. They are saying to us that they see a government of grown-ups who are trying to deal with the big issues that this country faces.
Kate Thaiss, thank you very much. And Keith Wallahan, I know these nights are never easy for the person in the losing chair, but we appreciate you being so open and honest with us tonight.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Keith.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Kate. All right.